is Nathan Bramson. I've been working over in Cairo, Egypt for the last 4 years, and my emphasis has been on street children. But as you know, if you know anything about groups working around the world with street children, it tends to be more of intervention type approaches, which mean they go out on the streets or they have help centers for the kids to come to, and they wonderful projects, and I'm not in the least bit slighting what is going on. But the fact is that children continue to flood to the streets. And if you know, worldwide, street children now make up about 300 million. So 300 million street children, which would be around the 5th largest country in the world. So that being said, it's a significant population. The highest number of street children reside in India, but that's partially due to their population of over 1 billion. But if you take the percentage of street children in relation to the population of a nation, Egypt actually comes out on top with the highest percentage. Approximately 1.5 million street children in Egypt, and they have a population of 80 million. Now, the 1.5 million street children is not the highest estimate nor the lowest. I just try to take a figure which is in between and is a reliable source. That being said, my focus has been in Cairo. Cairo alone, very safe, very low estimate is 200,000 street children in one city. Cairo has a population of about 22 million, although it grows by 1 million residents every 9 months. So it is a booming city. And when I say 22 million, you could say 30 million and be correct. It just depends how many suburbs you want to include in the population. So my focus has been in Cairo. But that being said, as I worked with street children, and more so on the intervention level, it really hit me that, hang on, what is causing this influx of street children, and why does Egypt have a number which is so drastically higher than the nations around it? First of all, economically, it has a lot of oil and petroleum. It's got a fairly decent economy if you go over there. As well, politically, it's somewhat stable compared to nations around it. So statistically speaking, or just demographically speaking, it should not be the country which is producing this amount of street kids. So what is causing this thing? And that's really what the basis of this talk is about. What is causing Egypt's mass exodus to the streets? And what can be done to halt the influx? Well, as I started studying more so about the street children and what is causing it, I realized a very interesting factor, and that is that 70% of the street children in Cairo are school dropouts. That's significant to realize, because now we realize only 30% never attended school, which means out of that 1.5 million, at one point, 70% of those kids were in the school system. So that means we had access to them, we had the opportunity to input, but somehow they left that system and went to the streets. Now, let me define street children for you so you know what I'm talking about. First, the United Nations definition of street children is somewhat vague, but nonetheless, I should read it to you. It is children or individuals under 18 who spend the majority of their time on the streets and have minimal contact with their family, and they lack supervision. Okay? So, individuals under 18. That being said, there are 3 forms of street children, and all 3 of these are included in the study. You have children who are on the streets, children who are in the streets, and children who are of the streets. Children who are on the streets probably live at home, but they leave early in the morning and go to the streets and beg, and then come back at night, or they just spend their time on the streets because home is not a safe or a positive environment. Second category, children who are in the streets, are children who probably come from rural areas, have left home, either at their parents' bidding, or it could be abuse, it could be whatever the case is. They come to the big city, they work, every few months they go back home. Please inform me in 15 minutes, please. And the third category, children of the streets, are children who you might imagine in your head, who have no parents, who are maybe orphaned, whatever the case is, and the street is fully their home. So let's go back to the statistic I mentioned. 70% of the children on the streets are school dropouts. Why are they dropping out? If I was to ask you that question, you would probably say the number 1 reason is economics. However, that falls 4th on the list of reasons of why they're dropping out of school, which is what caused this entire study to take place. I was surprised by that, but the top 3 reasons of why children are dropping out of school are these. Number 1, poor scholastic performance. Number 2, a low value or interest in education by the student or the parent. And number 3, school-related reasons, such as the environment of the classroom or abuse from teachers, so the environment of the school. So basically, I'm going to speed up because I want to give you time for questions. I took an approach to this to try to I'll look at 3 different areas of analysis as we contemplate why are kids leaving the schools and what can we do about it. So, 1, the system of learning. 2, the environment in which they learn. And 3, the support of society for education. So those are the 3 things to look at. The first is, what is a system of learning in Egyptian schools? I'm going to keep this extremely brief, but basically, all education in rural Egypt, and in the cities too for the most part, is via rote memorization, which we're pretty familiar with. I write it on the board, you memorize it. Now, I have to give credit to the Egyptian government. They realize that this is a problem. Now, realizing a problem is not the same thing as doing something about it, but they have outlined a method of change, we could just say. So, rote learning emphasizes memorization rather than critical thinking, and content rather than comprehension. So, it's more about knowing that piece of information rather than knowing the why that piece of information exists. And I don't need to go into detail about that. You know what rote memorization is. So for the sake of time, we're going to kind of move on a bit from that. But that being said, they have outlined in their plan for pre-university education reform the need to change to more interactive learning. That being said, little to none has actually been done about that. The World Bank characterized instruction in Egyptian schools as authoritative, teacher-centered, non-collaborative or cooperative, exclusively academic, compartmentalized, and discipline-specific. Now, I know that's a lot of jargon, but the point is when you enter an Egyptian classroom, and I want to give you a flavor and a taste of this, it's not a place which is a friendly environment. There's a reason kids maybe don't want to stay. For instance, questions are highly discouraged and in many cases not allowed. But why are these things true? First of all, you have to understand the background of teachers who are in the classrooms. Teachers in Egypt, and specifically rural Egypt, tend to come directly out of the school in which they were previously taught. So as you go through school, you compile what they simply call a notebook. And these are directly from the mouths of teachers, superintendents, and you can ask me about my research methods later, which were a lot of focus groups, surveys, interviews. So this was very much face-to-face. But basically, as you go through university or school, you compile a notebook. And this notebook contains the information that you've memorized from the board. Then, when you become a teacher, you take that same notebook that you used, and now it is your job to transmit the information from that notebook into the minds of the pupils you have. Now, if this is my notebook and I am teaching you from this notebook, you ask me a question, if it's not in my notebook, I might not know the answer. And if you know anything about Arab culture, and this is not against Arab culture, it is just a fact of Arab culture, saving face and respect of authority is very important. So therefore, you're asking me a question I don't know, I'm not very happy with you, and I'll probably just tell you to shut up. And that's more the typical response. Now, if it is a religion class, you are strictly not allowed to ask questions, period, because that is something which should not be discussed in the open forum as a question format. So you have to understand where the teachers are coming from, and so when they're in the classroom, it is a place simply of transmitting information. One principal told me, the teacher is a dictator, not a facilitator. And so, of course, we have this idea of the sage on the stage, not the guide on the side, as we oftentimes use. And so, that being said, from this rote memorization aspect, what we are trying to focus on is implementing alternative learning methods, multiple intelligence theory, like Howard Gardner's theory, into the classroom by getting the children out of the seat, by getting the chairs simply out of a row into a circle, by letting them act out history stories, I could go into a lot of details on that one, but the point is we need to move away from the rote memorization. So the first thing was the system of learning. The second thing that we looked at was the environment of learning. This is something which may seem very simple, but it's of utmost importance. Let me first give you some statistics that were carried out by a survey carried out by UNICEF of the public preparatory schools. Absorb these stats as I read them. It was discovered that 1/3 of students could not properly see the blackboard. 9% struggled to hear the teacher. 86% of the classrooms had poor lighting. And only 55% had adequate space to write comfortably. Now, I know that those are just statistics, but if you can imagine 50 students, maybe a room a little bigger than this, but 50 students crowded into here with very minimal resources. Now, if my style of teaching is only writing on the board and you're memorizing, if you can't see the blackboard, there's going to be a very big problem occurring. Because you aren't going to write down the information, thus you're not going to memorize it, and thus I'm going to implement something in my system of teaching, which is not allowed in the United States, but that being said, is abuse. Because you might ask me, you might complain about not seeing the blackboard, and I think it's an excuse to stand up. So, for instance, one method that they like to use, and this, again, these are all directly from the mouths of students or teachers, is they take a chair and they put it up front. And so because you're complaining about not seeing, and if you know anything about Arab culture, once again, you don't show the bottoms of your feet. But in this case, you do. You must put your feet up as such, and they take a stick and they'll beat the bottoms of your feet, okay? In front of the class. And so then that student has to stay up there until another one gets in trouble, and then they'll put them up there. Now that's just one form, but there's a lot of forms. So the point is, you're not going to complain about not seeing the blackboard. It's okay. Just deal with the fact you're not going to learn that lesson. They say in a classroom of about 50 kids, 2 of the 50 kids will really get the material with the learning style and the system of learning. But let's go a little further into that. Maybe it's not just your vision, but it's your hearing. You can't hear the teacher. I asked teachers, and I took from numerous teachers, what percentage, and this is not a scientific way of taking a survey, this is just kind of a side question, what percentage of the kids you think have ever had an eye or hearing exam? And so I took all their totals, and I took one of the higher ones, and you're going to laugh when I say it's the higher one, because most of them said, oh, none of the kids have ever been to the doctor. But the high one, I think, was 3%. So let's say 3% of those children have ever had a hearing or an eye exam. We're talking Upper Egypt at this point, not Cairo, but the street children in Cairo are mostly from Upper Egypt. So in Upper Egyptian schools, in the rural areas, if we're talking 3% of the children have ever had a hearing or eye exam, the entire reason they ended up on the streets or out of the schools and needing something to do with their time may simply be because they couldn't see the blackboard. Now that is a little baffling to, let's just say, Western mindset, but that being said, it's something to definitely contemplate. Now, we could go a lot more into detail about the environment of the classroom, and especially the abuse issues, and if you want to talk to me on the side about these things, I would be glad to. But once again, there's almost no teacher supervision, which obviously causes a lot of abuse, and not just on the physical side, sexual side for sure. I've got some horrific stories of that, and also on the emotional side. And that is one thing that really I've heard straight from the kids that drives them out of there, is the emotional side. Being told immediately you're stupid and you have no ability to learn. I mean, every child who has ADHD in the Western world would be told that in an Egyptian classroom where you have to sit still for 8 hours of the day. So my point is not that the system's perfect over there. All I'm saying is children who have to sit in one place are going to move, and they're going to be ultimately labeled something over the course of time in this kind of environment. So we have the system of learning and we have the environment of learning that both have created some issues. I only have 5 minutes left. Oh, okay, I wanted to give you 15. I was waiting for that. I'm sorry. Okay, so finally our last aspect of this, I'm going to skip right here to the end, is society supportive education. I'm going to keep this to 1 minute so that you can ask questions. Parents actually are not even encouraged, sorry about that, they're not allowed to be involved in the classroom. One teacher I asked, how often are you evaluated? He laughed at me. He said, evaluated? I write evaluations on myself. And I turn them in to the superintendent. And another teacher said, no, I do get evaluated. I get evaluated about once a month. Another one said, it's been 1.5 years since last time I was evaluated. My point is evaluation is almost non-existent. The other thing is the budget. You might say, well, the government needs to give more money to educate. The government's increasing the budget every year, 14% this year, up to 48 billion pounds. Million. I better get that right. A lot of money. So don't quote me on the amount. A lot of money. 14% increase this year. But over 35% of that goes to administrative costs. Now they've added 11,000 new schools in the last couple of years in Egypt, but remember the system of learning. So the point is that children are dropping out of the schools because of the system of learning, the environment of learning, and society's support of education. On the streets, the street children that we interviewed that have dropped out of school, only 6% of their mothers could read, and only 21% of their fathers. The point is they're coming from homes where education was not valued highly to start with. So when they go to a system of learning where it's not encouraging, it's not conducive, and it's not effective, the natural thing is for them to shift out. And so what we're aiming to do, and I can't spend time on this, is to implement alternative learning methods into the schools, to identify highly vulnerable children, to provide medical, to try to make it mandatory, but at this point you have to start with one model school at a time, to provide the medical exams, the hearing, the eye exams, so that we can see who are the children who are at high risk of being pushed out of the system. And then through targeting them and through providing them the alternative forms of learning, slowly make the change of keeping kids in the school, but also providing them the education they need to pursue their potential. All right. I'm sorry that was an overload. Very quickly, any questions at this point? Yes.
Often, and with other presentations, we often seem to be fixing up kind of at the end point, but I wonder how the teacher education programs in any particular place are being changed, so you don't have the end product of a teacher who operates in that fashion.
Yes.
So we can work with teachers once they're already, but they're kind of set in their ways oftentimes. I wonder if you get the next generation of teachers, sometimes you can make a lasting change and start to change the culture. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
The new, young, fresh,
exactly.
Still got a little bit of enthusiasm in them. Type teachers.
Absolutely, and we actually because we do teacher training as well, and with the teacher training we're targeting young teachers. The problem too with that is even though they give a lot of money to education, teachers are one of the worst jobs. So when you make it through school in rural Egypt, like I talked about the notebook, that's pretty much rural Egypt. But in the big city, if you're when you come out with your final test score, it tells you what you can do. If you're in the top category, you can be an engineer, a doctor, and whatnot. The bottom category is teacher. So it's only those who are failures in the academic system who can go back to education, which doesn't encourage anybody to do it. If you say I'm a teacher, it's like a degradation, whatever we want to say. It's you were a failure, you're a teacher. And that does not encourage it. So you're right, we have to target the young teachers and we have to try to inspire, but there needs to be a value placed on the teacher, and that's not being done currently with society's support of education. It's sad because they are so
Is there a lot of private schooling in Egypt?
Tons. And there's some amazing tools we can use for like Montessori type methods within. And the private schools use those, and that's what's incredible is when you meet someone on the street, you can tell if they were private school or public. I mean, just like that. Something I did talk about before, though, too, is rote memorization is often used in contexts where they want everyone to think alike. And it's true that there is very much a curriculum that needs to be in the head of every individual. And so sometimes they're hesitant to place new concepts into, or create creative thinking. One teacher told me, the schools here kill creativity. And that was just his word. And it's very true.
Can you just speak to the organization where the Rock Kids?
Yes, it's Relief, Opportunity, and Care for Kids. And we work together with, this project we're working with the Egyptian government because it's public schools. So, but we also work in cooperation with groups like USAID or UNICEF, really whoever is involved in. We've also worked with street gangs. This necklace I'm wearing is actually from a gang member who gave it to me to show that we're allowed to interact with them and work with them, whatever the case is. So we partner up with local groups on the ground. So on the ground, we operate through whoever's already doing it, kind of facilitate the process, do a lot of training, and whatever the case is. But our focus is street children in Egypt. So.
And is there a gender balance in terms of who's leaving school, or is it primarily males?
The higher percentage would be definitely males, but part of that reason is in rural Egypt, a lot of girls don't necessarily go to school. Or the other reason is males are more useful in the fields. So there's a couple other reasons beside that. But on the street, and I'm just taking that data from the streets themselves, though, there are definitely more boys than girls out there, although the girls are increasing. In fact, this one woman said to me who works with an Islamic NGO in Cairo, and she said with tears in her eyes, she said it's 20 years ago, or at that time, now it's been 25 years ago. 25 years ago, there were almost no girls in the streets. She says the influx of girls in the streets tells me something is really, really wrong with society because it has a big shift. It used to all be boys. Any more questions?
How are you going with introducing multiple intelligence theory and whatnot? How are the teachers responding to you? You having some luck?
Great question. Yes, we are. They're very excited because they feel, because we've chosen the teachers carefully, the young teachers with some passion, desire to learn. We're doing it at this point with no budget increase, which means simple methods, like the history lesson I said. If you have a history lesson, get the kids out of their chair, teach them their part, and then act out the story. Methods of getting, circle conversation, discussion groups. So instead of sitting in classroom format, let's put them in a circle, and then you bring up a topic and you have these different aspects to it. Or reading games or math games, counting, you actually using physical objects in the room for learning math at the primary levels, first, second, third. The idea behind that is anywhere you are, you can do it. Now, in addition to that, there are some places where we're actually using models more of Montessori type capacity, which does require actual budgets and definitely a lot more resources. But that being said, we're trying to show them you don't have to have anything more than what you already have. You can teach in another way. And yeah, the kids are really responding to it. In fact, in this one school, we took the bottom 20% of the kids, and after 6 weeks, and they were majorly failing after just 6 weeks, 38% of those kids were easily passing just after 6 weeks. I mean, it makes a huge difference.
I must say that you're really working towards a very noble cause. It's I just want to ask you, when you shared your concern,
Yes.
it seems that you are quite self-motivated person towards this cause. Seems from your level of energy. So I just want to ask, when you shared this concerns with the top management within the authority, what kind of response you got from them in the first place?
A very slow response. In fact, my first response was a warning from the government to back off. 2.5 years ago, when I started really getting to work with street children and starting to see the fact that some things weren't making sense, I started having secret police following me, and one of my coworkers said, they want you to back off. There's a red line, you're getting close to it. And so, fair enough. So then we really started working together. And then as we started working together, making the ideas their ideas. And that's the most important thing, I think, in any development work, is don't come in with a preconceived idea of what change needs to take place. You need to go in with a humble attitude, work with them, and see the situation. Then as ideas merge from mutual collaboration, which collaboration is mutual, then change takes place. So, and as far as the passion goes, it's easy to be passionate when statistics become friends. So that's what's happened. Thank you very much.
Wonderful
Appreciate it.
presentation.